Thank you, Carolyn. That was an amazing panel, and thank you to all of our panelists for sharing their insights. I've learned a lot in this last hour. Goals are important to workplaces. They give employees something to work towards, but inclusion can't be measured in the way that production or sales or revenues are. So now we're going to hear from 3 leading manufacturers on how they have embedded and measured D&I goals for their employees and how other manufacturers can implement these practices in their own facilities. I am excited to be joined today by 3 amazing D&I leaders, Ray Dempsey, Michelle Murphy, and Alita Richards. So we are going to jump right into our panel, and we're going to talk about goals when it comes to D&I. So let's start with Ray. Can you give us a brief introduction of yourself, where you work, and what your company is doing with D&I today?
Sure, AJ, thanks for having me as part of this conversation. My name is Ray Dempsey. I lead diversity and inclusion for BP in the Americas. I've been doing that for just about 3.5 years. It's been a great adventure at the end of my 30 years in our company. We have really made some real important choices in the last few years about diversity and inclusion. And I guess what I'll point out specifically in this introduction is just how we've been determined to move from a culture of what I call good intentions about diversity and inclusion to a culture of real, genuine accountability, just as in all the other areas of important business priority. So looking forward to talking more about that.
Perfect. Michelle, you want to give us your introduction?
Sure. Thank you, AJ. I'm very happy to be here with you all today. I'm Michelle Murphy. I lead diversity and inclusion and talent management for Trane Technologies. Trane Technologies is a climate innovator. We actually debuted March 2nd of this year. We were formerly Ingersoll Rand, and we spun off our industrial businesses, and they joined Gardner Denver to become the new Ingersoll Rand, and we became Trane Technologies. From a diversity and inclusion perspective, I think we, similar to Ray, we've had really good intention for quite some time. And over the past few years have really tried to turn those intentions into actions by making really bold commitments like signing on for Paradigm for Parity and the CEO Action for Diversity and Inclusion, and doing a lot more activity around driving both diverse representation and a feeling of inclusiveness within the company. So excited to join the conversation today, AJ. Thank you.
Thanks for being here. And Alita, why don't you give us your introduction and who you work for?
Hi, I'm Alita Richards, and I work for Covestro, LLC. We're a part of Bayer, which I'm sure everyone's familiar with Bayer aspirin, and also Bayer crop products. We were the chemical arm, so we provide polyurethane foam chemistry, coatings and adhesives, of which group I'm responsible for, in addition to plastics. So we provide the raw materials that we sell to other folks that make the things that are probably all of you have around you right now. For us, it needs to be a part of the culture. Diversity and inclusion needs to be a part of everything you do day to day. And we've done a great job of incorporating safety into how we live and breathe, and continuous improvement as to how we live and breathe. And so now we have been focusing on, over the last few years, how we truly embrace this concept of making sure that everyone feels included. And so that's kind of the journey that we're on now, is to talking about it, getting consensus that's important, aligning that it's the right thing to do, and now how do we know that we are making changes in the organization?
That is the perfect segue. How do we know we are making changes? So diving into the question. So since May, we have seen numerous CEOs pledge to prioritize D&I. They're talking about unconscious bias, engaging in courageous or crucial conversations. But why do you think that setting a top line goal is so important for a company? Alita, I'll start with you, but anybody feel free to jump in.
Sure. This is a discussion we're having right now, right? Each one of the businesses at this point in time, has been setting up our own individual responsibilities for each one of those businesses that I refer to. And so now we're discussing establishing what that top line should look like. What should all of us be doing across all of the business and corporate functions, production, and everywhere else to make sure that these are agreed upon metrics. I think the reason why that's important is it sets the tone. It sets the tone that it is important. It is something that senior individuals in the organization, including our president, and CEO here within the United States, also believes is important as to why they want to set their own goals and objectives. And so I think it requires probably movement from both kind of that groundswell in addition to setting those overarching objectives. So everyone understands and appreciates that it's important. It's something that needs to be done.
And Michelle, so Michelle's with Train Technologies and they're actually the chair of the NAM board. And I know that Mike Lamach actually felt personally that setting a top line pledge and engaging the NAM pledge for action, actually. Why do you think he felt that was so important to have that come from the top?
Multiple reasons. And I think starting first with the importance that we have placed on increasing the diverse representation within the company in an effort to make a more inclusive environment. And from a much broader sustainability effort, which really is, we think of ourselves now in the Train Technologies company as a sustainability company. And so part of our sustainability goals, and we've set quite bold 2030 goals around sustainability, both environmental and social. And on the social side, what we're really trying to do is promote opportunity for all. So we want not only within the company and how our employees feel, but also in those communities where we live, work, and serve. We want our employee base to be reflective of those communities. We also want to be doing good in those communities and creating opportunity for people there to have livable wage jobs and economic mobility that allows them to prosper. And so we feel like we think about it as a responsibility as a company to help do that in those places where we are. And so I think for us, it starts there. Also, as you mentioned, Mike Lamach is our CEO and the president of NAM, board president. He's been personally very engaged in our diversity and inclusion journey. He actually started it 10 years ago when he became CEO. It was one of the most important things to him was to diversify our workforce and really create a culture where people felt like they belonged and could bring them their best self every day. And he's been on that and has not wavered from that vision since he stepped into that role. And so with that unwavering support, we've been able to really drive a lot of change. And that's what, in many cases, that's really what this is about. We're driving large scale change across companies and across communities and with the intent that across the world and really creating that positive impact.
So that's perfect. And I know how committed he is. When we started this summit yesterday, I read a statistic from our NAM report, or our Institute report, from 2018, which is that while 87% of CEOs think D&I is a top line priority, only 33% have a dedicated diversity person. And Ray, I'm going to direct this to you because you are a CDO. So how do you engage? I mean, all three of you come from very progressive companies who are engaged in D&I, but how do you talk about the importance of having someone at an executive level that is there for goal setting and engagement of specifically diversity and inclusion?
AJ, I'm glad you asked that because I was thinking about what Michelle just said and the idea of responsibility and the alignment to other business priorities. And what I have in my head about this really ties perfectly to that point. Having a dedicated leader, making this a top line priority demonstrates that making progress in diversity and inclusion is not just a good thing to do and not just the right thing to do. It really is a business imperative. It underpins our ability to perform, to compete, and to do well as an enterprise. And I think when you understand that from the commitment and the drive from the very top of the company, the CEO, and indeed even the board of directors, I think that's where you start to make it clear to your organization and to your people that it's not just an initiative. It's not just a phase. It is meant to become the way that we will do work, the way that we'll think about people and processes, and ultimately in service of underpinning the performance of the business.
Okay, so let me ask a question. When we talk about goal setting, we first talk about intent, right? What is, and this is a question that has come up many times over the past, since May, let's just be very honest, since May, we have been asked, what is the intent of setting a goal for racial diversity rather than a broad diversity goal? Or is it your opinions that we should have broader diversity goals and not focus on specific dimensions?
Hey, Jay, I'll jump into that and I'll say yes and yes. So we did launch what we call a framework for action just in August of this year. So it was not an immediate knee-jerk reaction to the events in late May. We did have a series of what we called listening lounges in June, where we heard some really powerful stories from colleagues around the country and indeed in places around the world. And that prompted us to decide that we needed to take some time to be very clear about where we are and what gaps we had to close. And that resulted in this framework for action. It's 11 specific points, and it goes well beyond just representation. It does call for specific things like doubling the number of African-American group leaders, our most senior executives, but it also calls for us to double our spend with diverse suppliers. We took a really, what felt like a bold step and said that we would prohibit the Confederate flag and other symbols of hate from all BP locations around the country. And those things have really started to make an enormous impact in the way people think about our commitment in BP. I think the thing about metrics, though, is almost all companies will have a statement on their website that says we want to be a company that gets the very best of all of our employees. And I really do like those words, but after that, I usually start to say blah, 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 because the words are all the same. And what I think companies are appreciating now is we've got to be clear about what it really means. Where are we now? Where do we really want to be? And how will we measure that progress? And that's why the elements in our framework for action matter so much.
Leader Michelle, anything to add there?
I'll jump in. Absolutely agree with Ray. I think that it's a fine line. If you are truly professing that you want a culture that is inclusive, when you really highlight one particular group within that culture, in a way it starts to be non-inclusive because now you're focused on one. That being said, there are groups within a culture that because of racial inequality, just a glass ceiling for females, particularly in the chemical industry, you do need to set up some metrics or targets to make sure that for those who are underrepresented or for those who really don't have that many seats at the table, that you also start to change that within the culture. But that needs to be a part of a holistic diversity program. If you start a diversity program and you only want to focus on female executives or increasing the number of females in your company, your diversity and inclusion program will then just have a focus on females and trying to get females as executives in the company. One of the things that we just finished with our country council, a review of our demographic information, who's being promoted, who's moving, how are we keeping diverse groups in the organization. But that has to be a part of a more holistic picture. Because if the first thing that I, as someone who's not in that group, starts to ask is if this really is an inclusive environment and if this really is a program for everyone, why are we only focused on that individual or those groups? And so I think don't put your hand in the sand. right? I think some people also start an entirely holistic diversity program because really that's easy because then everybody feels included. But you also have to pull back the covers and really figure out if you do have areas or where you do have areas that you need focus, and do that at the same time that you're starting that comprehensive diversity program.
Michelle?
Okay, maybe just one add. I think for us, and agree with everything that's been said. I think for us, as we were looking at what it was going to take to really create a culture that was truly inclusive, we let the data tell the story and drive our decisions. And it became, because that was what it was grounded in, it's just math. So like, and in an engineering based company, you know, where logic always prevails, it was easy for us to talk about it that way too, and explain, you know, this is what representation looks like around the world and specifically in the United States. And here's what it looks like within the company. And there's a couple places where it's really not aligned. And we know, I mean, the research, and this research has been out there forever, and we seem to keep doing the research to continue proving that it's true. But we know that diversity, and you can cite many different sources, but we know that that is how it works. And so making that case hasn't been all that hard. I'm not saying that everybody gets it and that it's easy. I don't mean it that way at all. But you can make the case pretty clearly and quickly. You also just really have to know your data for the internal numbers and understand what that means and know what your change levers are.
So based on all of your answers, I think I probably know the answer to this, but let me ask anyway. Who sets your company's goals? Is it hierarchical or is it collaborative? Especially if you're using data, how is it coming up from the bottom, or is there a group? Is it cross-functional? What's the actual process for setting the goals?
If I could jump in, because we're in the process of doing that right now. Last year, each one of the businesses, so each one of the senior VPs for each one of the businesses thought about what they wanted to set up as objectives, targets, how they measure the results, the whole gambit for what would happen within those businesses. In addition to our supply chain head, and all the other corporate functions. This year, we're all taking a look at the objectives we set for 2019 and 2020, and we're figuring out how we want to revise those for 2021. While that is going on within the leadership teams and within those groups, our president is also looking at, and to Ray's point, our head of D&I for the organization, because I also believe that's important position. They are looking at all of the objectives that are now kind of flowing from, you know, the American Chemistry Council and all of the other industries that we're a part of, and looking at those holistic objectives, then reviewing the objectives that we have within the teams. And then also at one of our next country council meetings, figuring out what are going to be those high level overarching objectives that tie in the objectives that kind of presented themselves from each business, who really would have some slightly different objectives that they need to look at. That taken into consideration those trends and the industry objectives that have been identified, given all that's happened in 2020, right? And then what we want to do as Covestro. And so for 2021, we'll have overarching objectives that tie in externally and internally. We will have business group or even functional objectives. And so it's a combination of everything you just said. It's collaborative, it's top down, it's out in, it's in out, trying to really define the best set of objectives that we could find for the whole organization.
Okay, so I'm going to get a little bit more tactical because we're starting to get questions, but what kind of metrics are you looking at when you determine what goals you're setting? Are you looking at employee surveys, retention data, hiring data? Are you prioritizing certain metrics over others?
I can maybe get us started. We like data, so we look at all types. So from our annual engagement survey to how we look at different pulse surveys that happen across the organization on a number of topics, as well as our demographic data, as well as the trends that we see happening kind of in, just in the future of work, if you will. And so we're looking at a lot of pieces. We know, or what we believe to be true, is there are really three components that kind of make up what your representation looks like. And so we feel like we've gotten that pretty clear. You obviously have hiring, you have promotions and pulling people through the pipeline within the company, and you have retention on, just simply, are you keeping people? I think for us, what we've started to spend, maybe shift a bit of our energy to, is what does onboarding look like, and how are we engaging people so that when we're hiring diverse employees, how does it feel once you're here? And I think that's been maybe a little extra hard in the COVID world, because it's just a little bit more isolating. But that the inclusion metrics, I believe, equally as important as I would say debating how best to measure inclusion. And we have some really good ways to do it through employee survey, but I think there's probably more and other ways we could do that too. So interested in hearing if others have some really good ways to do that. For setting the metrics, for us, it has been on the representation side, looking at data, looking at what does the gender representation look like around the world? Therefore, that's what ours should be. We believe that it should be at parity, 50-50. On the race and ethnicity side within the United States, we're looking at the racial and ethnic representation within the country and saying that our employee base should match what is available in the labor pool in the country. And that's how we have looked at setting our goals.
Ray, can I assume BP is doing the same for metric setting and data collecting?
We are, just like with Ada and Michelle, we're an engineering-based company. We love data. And what I've really pushed us to do over the last several years is to really go a bit deeper, even in those three areas that Michelle just outlined, in the hiring, the development and promotion, and then the retention. Let's do a bit more analysis to understand some of the reasons why we get what we get in those areas. So on hiring, we've said we want to hire a diverse workforce, and we keep going to the same school we've always gone to and hope for different results. So we started to examine, what really are the outcomes, and what choices do we need to make to aim us in a place where we achieve greater results, whether that's about gender or ethnicity. In development and progression, we've been examining details like performance rating outcome. Every year we go through a performance management exercise, and performance ratings are a big factor in the way that people are selected for development opportunities and ultimately promotion. So we need to make sure we understand that the way that is working is equitable and fair and gives everybody a fair shot. And then even on retention, we certainly want to know why people leave, and we have to explore exactly what the trends are, and we try to break that down by subgroup. We started to look carefully at this index called the Leadership Parity Index. It's essentially an illustration of the glass ceiling. It looks at the proportion of any particular group in leadership levels as compared to the proportion of that same group in what we call our professional stats. And if people really are being pulled through in a consistent way, then every group should be at a 1.0 on that index. And when we see differences, it's a signal that there's some things that we need to explore more carefully. So I agree completely with the way Michelle outlined it. And my challenge is to look underneath those headlines and make sure you have an appreciation of what's driving those performances.
Okay, so let's chat about diversity versus inclusion. One, diversity is measured, right, in hard data. You can look at it, you can do the math, right? The other's a little bit harder to get those performance indicators for. So what best practices are you utilizing to measure the inclusion of your company? Well, I'll jump to you because I see you now.
No, similar to Michelle, we used to do an annual employee survey. And then we would take, and I'll just speak for our company, a few months to analyze and look at all the data. We've adjusted it now so that it's once a quarter, and it's only 10 minutes. I mean, it's a very short survey. And so throughout the year, we can really gauge customer engagement. We're able to figure out if there are pockets or changes or shifts within the year, which gets into, I feel a part of the team. I would recommend this organization to someone else. All of those indicators that tell you if someone either is engaged with their work and also feels included within the organization. And so I think that has been helpful, because to your point, the inclusion part is, for the lack of a better way of saying it, the warm and fuzzy, it's the gray, right? It's there aren't a lot of specific facts and details around that. It could be survey, it could be more anecdotal. One of the things that we do from an anecdotal perspective is, at least once a month, I set up informal, randomly selected groups of folks, and for about 45 minutes, we just sit and talk. What questions do you have? What concerns do you have? And I think that with inclusion, there has to be some level of engagement. It can't just be, and all of us do it. And we just finished our salary survey, our equity around salary surveys. If I'm a Black female and I'm a chemist at this level with these number of years, do I have the same kind of relative salary as other folks in the organization? Those are kind of data-driven analyses that can be done. Inclusion is much more around feeling thought, and I think a survey helps. And one of the things that we found was that, and I'll just say, it just took us a long time to analyze that data. That by the time you got finished analyzing the data, you're about 4 months in. And so 3 other things might have happened in the organization. And I think these really short-term surveys give us a quick pulse check. And I know there are different ways to do it, but that's the way we found over the last year, just to quickly settle the survey and find out how folks are feeling about working in the organization, their colleagues, their supervisor, and then really dedicated to quickly looking at that data, making some quick review points, and then figuring out if there's things that we need to do over the coming months to adjust or to change, or to celebrate if something's going very well.
Positive note there. Ray, I know you said you guys were doing listening lounges. Is that something that you guys plan to continue to do, or is that something when we face new crises, as we do all the time, that you'll implement on an ad hoc basis?
Yeah, it fits within our description of activity that I just heard a lady use, which is engagement. We've been really intentional about creating conversations around various issues in the D&I landscape. The listening lounges we launched specifically in reaction to the tragic killing, the murder of George Floyd. And the response was overwhelming. We had a few of them. We expected a few hundred people. We ultimately touched thousands of people, not just around the US, but in the UK and in Europe and Latin America and Asia. It was pretty broad. So our intent is not necessarily to continue to do those specific kinds of events at that kind of a scale, but to continue to create those opportunities for people to talk. Later this week, I'll do a webcast with a couple of colleagues to talk about our progress in the course of this year and the progress against the framework that we launched and our plans for 2021. So that engagement element is a really big part of the way that we try to drive the agenda.
So with COVID, we've also seen women leaving the workforce in droves. Is this something that when new demographic and diversity issues arise, how do you continue to change your goals as needed, and make sure that people are still included? As so many of us are remote, and then you have half of your workforce still production on the floor. How do you manage the inclusion in those aspects and at that time? Michelle?
I don't know that I necessarily have an answer. I maybe have some thoughts. And I think what we have tried to do, really driven by the two pandemics we have happening in, at least in the country and many other countries as well, from, the spring through the fall, we've really put the call to action with our managers and have asked our managers to play the role that many of them were playing already, but even to be more intentional in checking in on people's well-being, checking in on how people were feeling as part of the organization or part of the team, whether they were in a production facility where they were actually seeing them or whether they were seeing them this way, which many of us are working like this all the time now. So really trying to create I don't know that you can really recreate the same in-person feel, but creating that same type of connection, even if it is virtual, and really allowing it to be, I'll say, local or happening where the people are. That's been one thing that we've done that I think is helping us. I don't know that it works for the long term, but it certainly has been helpful in this shorter term.
Leader Ray, do you have anything to add?
I think it's been a challenge, and I could probably speak for Ray and Michelle. I think when you have those individuals who work from home, you can be more supportive and more flexible. When you have folks that are actually at a manufacturing site, it's much harder to say, okay, you can work from home because we really need you on site. Some of the creative things that we've done with some of the, I'll say, parents who are working in the labs, who actually need to be in the lab to perform their job, is that we have identified some other projects they can work on from home. Their colleagues have stepped up and have helping to support some activity in the labs as we transition through this challenging time. And I think to your point, we've been blessed that we're in a situation that we can be flexible. And I think, Michelle, you started off by saying you don't have an answer. I don't have an answer either. At least I could appreciate and share a couple of things that we're trying to do to be as flexible and supportive for parents or for working women and for working single parents, particularly now, and how they can balance between, and we can maintain our push to be a successful business, but also to provide opportunities to include folks that are having challenges as no fault of their own right now. It's tough. It's tough. I have to say, I'm glad that part of me is glad that a number of our folks are either in the labs in Pittsburgh or can work from home. It's very challenging in a manufacturing facility to figure out how to balance that and to manage COVID exposure and everything else that needs to happen in a manufacturing site. So my hat goes off to those folks who manage our folks that are actually in the manufacturing unit.
AJ, I'll add one point. I love the way Michelle and Aleda described it, and it is really tough. But at BP, we're also in the process of reinventing our company in the midst of this pandemic and all the things going on in the world around us. We are, as we say, we're reimagining energy for people on the planet. We've set an aim to get to net zero carbon by 2050 or sooner. And those things have caused us to be even more thoughtful about the change in our workforce. We've got an entirely new executive team at the very top. And we just last week, or a couple of weeks ago, made announcements of the fourth tier of our appointments, where we're really completely reshaping the entire company from top to bottom. And we've been really intentional about gender representation. We've been really intentional about the kind of conversations we have to provide the support. And we've also signaled that we're going to continue to work in a very flexible way. It won't just be what we've done in response to COVID-19, but the future for us will be some form of a combination of some people in offices and at manufacturing sites when they need to be, and then other forms of flexibility, whether it continues to be working from home or otherwise. And I think those signals, even if it's not yet a clear solution for the longer term, it's really helped people to know that we're doing everything we can to ensure that we preserve and grow the diversity and the representation of all differences around our workforce.
It's perfect. Yeah, I don't expect anybody to have a hard answer right now, and hopefully we won't need an answer for much longer. So when we talk about diversity goals, for many, especially those that are newer to the D&I journey, they just hear who was hired. That's what diversity means to people that are less familiar. So taking a look at what other types of goals are important to set for a company. You talked about employee surveys. Do you measure things such as in number of internal trainings or blog posts or external, how they make an impact to the local community? What are the types of goals that you feel are important for your company to be aware of that aren't just the demographics, here's who got hired and here's how long they stayed?
There's a few areas I'll mention, AJ. I mentioned already that we're focused on supplier diversity. We think who we do business with matters. And so we try to preserve a sharp focus on that in the way that we talk about our progress in diversity and inclusion. We care about our partners and the community organizations we work with. And while we're not motivated to go around and collect awards, we do pay attention to where we turn up on, say, the HRC annual survey and to ensure that we are continuing to do the things and demonstrate the commitment in various dimensions of diversity that makes us an employer that people want to join. We care about the working mother media analyses and there's many of them. So I'll make mistakes if I start to try to call them out, but those things matter. And then ultimately, I think we do care a lot about our own communities where we have a large employee presence. We do things to try to provide support and demonstrate our commitment to being a good neighbor. And we have ways where we try to examine whether or not those things are having the impact that we desire. So it's well beyond just our workforce representation, but we try to be specific about where we know we're trying to make an impact.
If I just building on what Ray shared, I think very, very similar. We do many of those same things, and they're really good barometers for us to know where we stand relative to many of the other companies, and also help us know what areas we need to focus on or where we need to do better. And I think one of the pieces that can be difficult in this is that there are many dimensions of diversity, and not all of them have a way to be tracked or measured or even maybe indicated. And so part of why we believe the inclusion piece is so important is because there are so many dimensions of diversity and many that are invisible. And so really trying to make sure that how we're thinking about things isn't just about the number or a representation piece or the visible aspects of diversity, but truly all inclusive, really no pun intended there, on all encompassing, maybe that'd be a better way to say it, so that we're really thinking about it in a truly holistic way. And again, part of that uplifting of the communities as well. Like I think about one of the things that we just rolled out is offering every employee a day to go volunteer. And part of that, knowing that so many of us are just trying to find ways to help. We have an incredibly generous employee base to begin with, but also wanting the company to be putting something into that, saying, take time and go do something. Of course, where it's safe, when it's safe, or how it's best safe, but really making that be part of that effort to be inclusive, not only within the company, but within the communities. And it's one more way that we're trying to add another level of care, during this time. And it's something that I expect it will continue for us.
So one of the things I'm often asked is how can companies that are doing very well, the three of yours, start to share best practices so that companies and manufacturers, specifically often small manufacturers that are just starting their D&I journey, can replicate. So I want to ask each of you to describe a best practice or case study that you have implemented to create a more inclusive workplace? And how are you measuring the effectiveness of that best practice? Alita, I will start with you.
So I'll answer it this way, and I'm trying and was thinking of an example that I think anybody could implement. I don't know how many folks are familiar with strength finders. It's kind of like Myers-Briggs, but it's a little more intense with the number of different variables for each individual. And last year we tried to find something that we could roll out, a kind of program that goes beyond just, as Michelle put it, it kind of touches upon those facets that are not easily recognizable, that everybody could participate in. And we could start to communicate and facilitate some level of inclusion. And so we use strength finders. Everyone participated within the organization. It was amazing to see how people embrace their top 5 strength finders. We just started a communications team with some folks who identified communications as one of their strengths. People are still referring back to that. We've done some sessions and some games where you had to guess folks, your colleagues, based on their strengths and some of their activities. And I'm trying to, and I know I'm making light, I guess, of an example, but I think it doesn't have to be rocket science, and it doesn't have to be very expensive for you to start getting people to feel like they're a part of something. And so for us, for the $20 or so, or probably even less for the surveys, or for the actual tool, and have somebody to come and just to facilitate, it gave us a common thing to circle around. And a common language for us to talk about. And I think that, which then reflects in some of the surveys that we've had as people become closer and better understand their colleagues and how they fit in the organization. So I can't say specifically that the specific strength finder activity helped with our survey results. I think a myriad of those kind of examples or how you build that culture and that community within your organization. So that would be one that I think I can share, that really any organization can go out and kind of implement something similar to that.
I love that idea. It's a great example. And nice, because you're looking at the uniqueness that every person brings, right? Which is really powerful. In sending the message and creating that culture. I guess my thoughts for people just starting out, I would say pick a few and try really hard to prioritize to the few. Pick a few things to get started and realize that what you're doing isn't a program or an initiative. It's beginning a large scale change. And so being thoughtful and prioritizing and picking those couple things that you can go do that people can see and feel is probably the place to start. And there's a lot of different things you could do for that. I'll share what we did. We started these 3 or 4 years ago, and they've been incredibly powerful for us, and they're free. It sounds a little bit like the listening lounges that Ray mentioned. We call them bridging connections. You could call them anything you wanted, but they're basically a safe space for people to come together and talk about controversial topics, or maybe not even controversial, just things that people don't know or are uncomfortable with. And so we pick a topic, and we've covered probably 10 or 12 different topics. We tend to repeat some of them just because of how powerful the discussions are. We create very few ground rules around how people participate in these, which is everyone's invited, and there's a expectation of respect in how we ask questions or share comments. But it's been a great way for us to truly bridge the connections between 2 very different viewpoints. And it doesn't cost anything. It takes time. And it takes a willingness to listen and demonstrate the empathy that many people need. in processing through whatever they might be struggling with, or wanting to share their experience with you. And what we've seen is how much people have learned through these different experiences. And, we have somewhere between, it seems like between 800 and 1,500 people that tend to join these. Some are, the people who are always going to come, and then oftentimes it's based on the topic of who's choosing to join. But they've been great ways to share very different experiences and create a sense of belonging or community within the organization.
Right?
I think the best practice I'll share, I love the ones from Alita and Michelle, and I think a good add to that is try to be intentional about transparency. I often find that one of our biggest inhibitors to the pace of progress is that there are just lots of people with perfectly good intentions, just focused on doing their jobs every day, and they just don't know where there are gaps and what role they might have in trying to close them. So we've made a lot of progress in the last few years in the way that we share data about where we are in BP with our internal colleagues. And we've made a commitment as part of our framework for action to launch a comprehensive diversity and inclusion report in this coming spring, alongside our annual report and our sustainability report. And it's a practice that I've observed by lots of companies around the US, particularly in the tech sector. And what I say to my BP colleagues about this often is that, well, they're not bragging. It's not that their numbers are great. And in fact, I think in many ways, we'll have data that while we're not content and we're not necessarily proud, it'll stand up pretty well against the representation and other metrics that are in some of those other companies. But their commitment to transparency, their commitment to saying, this is where we are, this is what we're doing about it, and this is the progress we expect to make, I think is a really powerful part of engaging your own workforce and frankly, inviting your stakeholders, your shareholders, your neighbors to be part of the progress you'll make in your company.
That's awesome. Those are all perfect examples. So thank you all so much. I do want to ask a question that came in via our chat, our live chat, and that is about living in a rural, less diverse demographic. So when we are talking about goal setting, are you able and do you break out goals so that you have, a top line global goal, as many of you have talked about, but also knowing that if you are in a less diverse community, that goal for that specific plant might be different than it is in a more diverse community? Or do you avoid that by talking about a broader context goals?
I think that's what's important, and that's what goes back to one of your original questions about who sets the goal and where who establishes them. I do believe you need to have an overall context and an overall vision for D&I. I then also believe that each unit group has a different nuance. They have a different community. They have a different. We have some groups that have more females than they do males. And so setting an objective that we want to increase the number of females for that particular group may not be appropriate. And so I think it's a combination of identifying what your vision is, and then also soliciting that feedback and allowing some of those other teams, particularly those that could be in a rural community, to identify how you make sure you have inclusion within your organization. Because I always like to tell folks, there are always folks that feel different, regardless of where they are. It could be, as an example, a new tech trainee that's just joined our organization that's sitting in a room full of folks that have 25 years of experience. They might all be white males, but there's still a difference. And so when we talk about inclusion, I think it's important that you also figure out how you can make sure that regardless of site, location, function, the folks within that team feel like they are respected and included. Hope that answers the question.
Yeah, that's perfect. Okay, I'm going to ask you my last question for today, and that is, what is your go-to resource for keeping up on D&I best practices and trends? If you can list a few, but where would you recommend people go?
I'll jump in. Mine's easy.
Yeah.
Dina Clark. Dina is our D&I head. If you don't have a Dina Clark, find a resource of that person who truly embraces it, is passionate about it, because Dina knows the latest and greatest of everything that's going on. She is counselor, coach, guru. She's my Yoda. She's everything from a D&I perspective. And I know if she were listening, and she very well be, she will laugh, but it is true. I think it is such a complicated and complex topic that it's important to have those resources that you can go to bounce ideas off. Ray, to your point, sometimes you say things or mean things, the intent might not be there, but because I don't understand all the nuance, maybe I didn't say it quite right. She's that guide, and I think it's critical to find those folks and add them to your network so that you have that resource available to you. Sorry, I get excited when I can toot Dina's horn. So
I like the Dina shout out. We all need a Dina. Okay.
I don't know if Alita would love it if I said I'm going to get myself a Dina, or not hers.
As long as it's not my Dina. As long as it's not my.
I understand. I agree with the argument there. Having subject matter expertise that both understands the external landscape, but also understands your company, your culture, your people, your leaders. I think that is a really important interface to manage. We have a bunch of great external partners, though, and you said one, and then you said a few, and so I'll be careful, because it would really be hard to distill it down to just one. We've had a great partner in a group called Coquel, formerly called the Center for Talent Innovation, and they really convene some of the best thinkers and sort of thought champions around diversity and inclusion around the country. We do rely on the HRC, and the Human Rights Campaign has done terrific work around the LGBT plus community for a really long time, and they have shared lots of great insights. We've had members of their team come and spend time with us and with our BP Pride BRG, and that's been really meaningful. I mentioned Working Mother Media, and there are groups like them, not just them, that do annual surveys, and they help to shape the way we position ourselves as an employer. And in the instance of that particular magazine, it's with working parents, but there's actually a broader set of audiences that they work with. So there are many, and so if any group is looking for that kind of expertise, a little bit of Googling will at least get you started and point it in the right direction. But there are some great examples.
And I guess maybe just an ad. There are so many out there. If you're getting started, or if you're in it and you're looking for, the kind of the right resources, there's lots of ways to write. I just have found, for me, I like steering towards research-oriented organizations where I can really understand how they did what they did to draw the conclusions that they've drawn. And then compare that, I think, Ray, to what you were saying about understanding the external, to also then understand how it translates internally, and knowing how you're going to, how ready are we for that change, or how we're thinking about leading the change. So just the research really helps me get grounded in fact, or as much fact as possible. And I have really come to appreciate that. I think one of the other practices that I've seen work really well in our company, and it actually started in some of the remote locations, where they came to us and said, we really want to do something around diversity and inclusion, and we have these company-wide ERGs, but we don't have enough. Take Women's Employee Network. We don't have enough women here to have our own chapter of a Women's Employee Network, but we have all these different interested parties. Can we do something different? And we said, absolutely. And so it became the foundation of something that we now know as inclusion networks. And we have several of them out across the company. And in many cases, they're in locations that aren't really large sites. They're in a lot of the smaller sites. But it's really a way for people to engage in diversity and inclusion related work and activities. And it's been a really powerful way for us to have inclusion be felt in all the different aspects, or all the different parts of the company.
I love that. if you will all indulge me, there was one more question that came in from the live chat, and I want to answer every question. And that is, it's an interesting one. What are some examples of good formal training to become a strong D&I leader? Masters, certificates, workshops, etc. And this kind of ties into what are the go-to resources? Thoughts? Like considerations?
Well, there are a lot of things out there. I hesitate to go to one particular source on that. I guess my take would be really understanding where you are. I think one of the most important things in being able to lead D&I efforts for a company is understanding where you are on all of these different aspects and dimensions, and being clear how your feelings or perspectives, just know where they are so you're grounded, and then know where they need to be for the company. And that self-reflection is a huge component of the learning. And so, yes, there are formal aspects of learning out there, different certificate programs, different assessments that I tend to find very helpful as part of that self-reflection and learning. But that's where I would start, is really understanding what it is I'm trying to change at this particular organization, and have a specific, I don't have a specific certificate I would recommend. I really would recommend starting with that self-reflection.
Agreement from Ray and Alita?
AJ, I can add just one quick thing. I love the way Michelle just said that. I was asked this question recently, and I think what I said was almost word for word the way Michelle just described it. Sometimes, though, the challenge that people come to me with is they want to be in diversity, equity, and inclusion, but they work now in some other space, and they want to know how they can position themselves, and should they go off and get a certificate? Is there a degree? And my encouragement really is to engage, to participate. There are the employee resource groups, or as we call them at BP, business resource groups. I was a member of business resource groups for a long time in my company. I was part of our diversity and inclusion council. So I had a chance to see the issues, understand some of the challenges, and understand the way decisions are made. And I think grounding your own passion, your own desire and commitment, that self-awareness Michelle described, with a real appreciation of how things get done and how you make change within your company and your culture, that's ultimately what can make you most impactful. So the certificates, the external programs, they're probably great to ground you in the literature, the research, and what other people think. But ultimately, I think the way you create impact is by connecting your own self-awareness, your commitment with an understanding of how to make change within your structure.
Perfect. Lead, anything you want to add, or? You good? Okay. Well, we are actually a minute over time, so thank you for indulging me. And I want to thank Alita and Ray and Michelle for your time and your expertise and your insights. It was immensely valuable.